Hello and welcome to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed, the podcast where you get quick, practical information about a hot topic. In the time it takes to make a cup of coffee, you'll gain insights on hot topics and pressing HR issues. I'm your host, Rebecca Jacobs, and we are so glad you're here. Before we start, here's my usual disclaimer that the podcast is general information only and does not contain any legal advice. Now it's time to dive in. In today's podcast, we're talking about navigating interview questions about obvious disabilities. Stay tuned through the entire podcast to hear a key tip for inclusivity when recruiting individuals with disabilities. So here's the scenario. Rob is the controller for a large company, and he runs the finance department. He has 10 direct reports. He has an opening for an accountant. Rob is excited to meet Tiffany. She's coming in this morning for her interview. Her resume was impressive, and he's looking forward to seeing if there's a good fit. Rob's assistant has already shown Tiffany to the conference room, where she's waiting for Rob. Rob opens the door and walks in. He sees her and is surprised to see that she has no arms. What he doesn't know is that her arms were amputated after an accident a few years ago. Tiffany has what the EEOC would call an obvious disability. Other examples of obvious disabilities would include an individual using a cane, walker, or wheelchair. Also, someone with a service animal, and those are just a few of many examples. Tiffany nods and smiles at Rob as he sits down. "I'd shake your hand if I could," she says, and laughs. At first, Rob takes her comment as an opening to discuss her condition, and he's ready to start asking conversational questions such as, were you born without arms or did something happen? How do you manage around your house? But Rob stops himself because his HR department has trained him on handling this situation. You'll recall that in the pre-offer stage, the Americans with Disabilities Act restricts what we can and cannot ask. So when we make an offer of employment, that unlocks more options for asking questions, but we aren't there at this point. So what did Rob learn to do from his HR department? He learned 2 easy steps. Step 1, Rob asks himself, do you reasonably believe that the person may need an accommodation to do the job? He remembers hiring Benjamin last year for a 100% remote accounts payable clerk position. Benjamin used a wheelchair to get around, and the position did not require any particular lower body mobility. And because Benjamin would not need an accommodation to perform that remote job, Rob knew he could not ask Benjamin anything about his use of the wheelchair. But for Tiffany, Rob must ask if he reasonably believes she may need an accommodation. The job does involve significant work on the computer, and she does not have arms or hands, so the answer here is yes. That takes us to step 2. As we move to step 2, it's critical that we make no assumptions about the person's abilities or inabilities. Rob may not be aware of all of the different assistive technologies out there. He can't assume that Tiffany won't be able to do the job just because he's not familiar with the options. So here's a question he is allowed to ask. Would you need an accommodation to perform the job? If she says yes, he can ask what type of accommodation. He can also ask, how would you perform the job of accountant? Now, he cannot dive into anything relating to her condition. He can't ask, what's the nature of your disability? How severe is it? When did it start? How will it progress? How do you manage it? So the recap here is Rob cannot ask anything about her condition or how she manages her impairment. If the disability is obvious and if he reasonably believes she may need an accommodation, he can ask her if she'd need an accommodation and what type that would be. Now, this standard also applies to where a candidate volunteers their disability status. Just because they mention it doesn't open the door to ask about the question or the impairment. It simply gets us into the same discussion as Rob can have with Tiffany. Remember, this is all pre-offer. After we make a conditional job offer, we can ask any disability-related question or require a medical examination, so long as everyone selected for the same job is asked the same questions or made to take the same examination. Finally, as promised, here's another tip to help your candidates with disabilities feel welcome to apply to your organization. In your job posting, do you provide specific contact information for the person your candidates should reach out to arrange for any accommodations they might need? Accommodations for the interview, accommodations for any particular assessments, perhaps even an email like accommodations@company.com or a phone number. When your candidates see that on your job posting, they'll think, hey, this company is interested in having people like me reach out. If there's something that they need in particular, they will feel more at ease reaching out and asking it because the door has been opened for that. So that is a good tip, something to make sure that you have in your job posting. We have a lot of great resources in the show notes. We have links to a couple of EEOC guidances, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The Job Accommodation Network is also a great resource, and I have a link to an article on disability disclosures. And also, there are examples of accommodations that some candidates may need when they come in and when they have obvious disabilities. So hopefully this has been helpful for you in answering the question, and thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed. For this episode, be sure to reference the show notes where you can sign up to connect for more podcast updates. If you have questions, you can connect with MRA's hotline team by emailing infonow@mranet.org or calling 866-474-6854. Check out other MRA episodes on your favorite podcast platform, such as MRA's 30-Minute Thrive. And as always, make sure to follow so you don't miss out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll have another hot HR topic in 2 weeks.